Hey team, welcome back to another great episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and today I am joined by Clint Prange. He's with Beck's Hybrids, and I'm excited to jump in, get his take on intentional leadership. Clint, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thank you, Mark, and glad to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a good conversation. What's it mean for you, Clint, to be intentional?
To be intentional, I really think that for me, anyways, it means top of mind. When I think about the things I'm intentional about when I wake up in the morning, I've got three buckets of things. That's probably changed over time. But boy, if everything I've kind of set up in my daily routine helps those things be top of mind, that's that intentionality. I talk with in the seed world that I'm in, and I'm dealing mainly with the sales team and agronomy teams a lot. But if we look at opportunities for growth, personally, professionally, whatever it may be. Boy, we talked about this a little bit before the podcast. It's like if we want to see growth happen, we got to be intentional about it. And usually, to be intentional, it's got to be top of mind. You're thinking about it. Can't consume you, but it's got to be top of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We also talked a little bit about, we didn't maybe give it this label, but I thought you did a good job of framing it up. We were talking about kind of leading versus lagging indicators, right? And if you want
Yes.
sales results, your current sales metrics today, the sales results that you have today are an indicator basically of what you've done, but they're not a good
Right.
indicator of what's going to happen. You can dive into that for
Yes.
me a little bit.
Yeah. So when we were talking about that, I mean, I think that's especially when it comes to leadership. I think sometimes when you think about metrics around leadership in general, especially in the sales world, people will want to look at the sales numbers, and they'll automatically think that, well, hey, if sales are good, that must mean they've got good leadership. And I guess I probably younger in my career, I probably thought the same thing. But the reality is, that again, they, like you said, they're lagging indicators. They do a really good job of telling me what's in the rear view mirror of what's happened, but they don't really give me any idea. If I'm driving a car, yes, I care what's behind me. But for any folks that have driven a semi before loaded with corn, I'm more interested in what's in front of me. And
Mm-hmm.
so, because that's the one that's going to get me in trouble really quick or cause a catastrophic deal. I got to pay attention to what's behind me, but I for sure got to know what's ahead of me. And so leadership and intentional leadership, that's a different factor because those sales numbers, they tell you what's done really well, but from a leadership standpoint, I got to have a little bit of an idea of what's going to happen in the future, because if that sales team's upset, if I've got things that are causing customers dissatisfaction, and all of a sudden 3 years from now, all that great sales growth is gone because I wasn't paying attention to some intentionality around leadership.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't matter at that point in time. You're just sitting there doing that constant churn, and boy, I see a lot of sales organizations, and a lot of young leaders get caught in that. I see some old leaders get caught in that sometimes, and they wonder why they're frustrated all the time. And boy, it comes down to some of that intentionality of that forward-looking thinking as well too.
Yeah, what I see a lot of people. I mean, a lot of times they end up calling because they're like, "Hey, my turnover is just out of
Right.
control," hey, or it's usually the one like all of a sudden they finally lost that person that they really didn't want to lose, right?
Yep.
There was some
Yep.
turnover, there were some rumblings, there were some issues going on inside the team or the organization, but then it's like that one person who they really depended on or really enjoyed, all of a sudden they're gone.
Right.
And
Right. Right.
that's what gets me the phone call a lot of times, which is too late. You should be calling me now
Right.
so that
Right.
we can
Yeah. Yeah.
proactively go to
The
work on
dam
your
burst.
team.
The dam burst already.
Yeah, right. I mean, now we got to put on a fire before we can do any actual real training, right? Which is
Yep.
fine. We'll do that. We help out with that kind of stuff all the time. And the time, that's like the old saying, right? The best time to plant a tree was 40 years ago. Second best time to
Right.
plant a
There
tree
you
is
go.
today, right? So,
Go.
yeah, man.
Yeah. I think about, you talk about the leadership standpoint, about that talent question. Just, I think that's a big piece around from an intentional, so top of mind. Okay. I have top of mind with intentional, my definition there, but I think about intentional leadership. So I look at leadership roles, especially in organizations where, I mean, that is a goal. You're trying to retain talent. You're also
Mm-hmm.
trying to heavily work on attracting the best talent that's out there, recruiting other talent as well too. And so I think when you create cultures, you create that environment where people want to be around that. And I know that sounds so simple, But actually, when you think about intentionality, it really is simple. We just don't take the disciplined time to do it a lot of times. But if you create an environment that people want to be around, that retains talent and it attracts talent. So I'm just a simple farm boy from Northeast Missouri. So I like to be very efficient with my time. And so if you can create that environment that does those two things, you can retain talent and attract that next level of talent that you're trying to get to really quickly.
I think a lot of people just get lost in the minutia of it. The thing
Yes.
about, what do I have to do for each individual to try to keep this person, right? And then often that answer becomes money, and then I think you end up experiencing the probably the salary bubble that we may currently have found ourselves in. And so, and where money is the only way to it. But the money is important. It's a component of the equation, but it's not everything. So what are you doing for yourself as a leader? What are you doing for your team as a leader? How are you contributing to your organizational culture to make it a great place? And a lot of people, I find this, and this is not unique to ag, but certainly around the broad scope of the ag industry that we work in, we get a lot of people, that are basically blaming the upper level leadership for the culture, for the, for what they live in, work in. And there's something to be said about that. Culture really is driven from the top down, but it's experienced from the bottom up. And as a leader, you have a part to play.
Absolutely. So one of the things I don't know, if your listeners, if they have been around Beck's, they've probably heard us talk a little bit about our culture we have at Beck's. It's very unique. And then it's funny, you'll ask people, I think we just had our state of the company here a couple of weeks ago. And I think then Scott Beck was talking about, we were over 970 employees now. When I started with Beck's 9 years ago, I was number 502. That used to be a big deal at Beck's. Everybody would talk about what number employee they were. So I remember I was 502. I was really hoping I'd be 500. When I walked in the front doors, balloons would fall. I'd win a new car, but I was 502, so I missed out. But it's funny though, in that 9 years that I've been here to today, we still talk about, we talk about culture, but we don't. I've been around organizations in whether working professionally for them or around other ones that they'll spend they'll have a 30-minute PowerPoint on their culture. And at Beck's, I don't ever remember us having a 30-minute PowerPoint, but we can talk about our culture and we all know what we're talking about. And I guess what I get to that is back to the intentionality. So you think about some of the things. You asked me about what I'm doing, but I'll tell you, here's something the company has done that I see our leaders instilling into us. We tend to really work really hard on finding people that fit our culture. And the cool thing about that is that those 970 employees, you could ask them all what the Beck's culture is. They'd give you a different but similar answer. And it's probably something rooted in hard work. It's something rooted in serving others. If those are two things you have, we probably have a seat in the bus for you. If you have a really great work ethic and a halfway decent attitude, we can work with the rest of that. And so whenever we hire people, we'll bounce back into that. We look for people that have that mindset. Because when you have those two things right there, okay, you've got a great work ethic and a halfway decent attitude, there's 90% of the work-related issues that are out there, right? Right. Let's make sure we can get through these things. And so when you have that intentionality around your hiring, that kind of helps the culture and the retention side of it, right? You find people that fit your culture, they want to be around that culture. That helps the retention out at that point in time. Yeah. For what I do, I feel like as a leader, as much as anything, is that I make sure we're not taking that for granted, right? Because what was important, what I found in my own life journey is that what was important to me when I was 24 years old is not the same things that were completely important to me when I was 27, 30, so on in life. Yes, there's some similarities to that, but there's differences or things that happen in life. And so you've got to, as a leader, I feel like you have to ensure that you do know your people, you do have a pulse, you are very active with your folks. Today you actually caught me in my office, and I'm not in here a whole bunch. I do feel like as my kids have gotten older, I've had to figure out ways to there are more and more activities. I've got to figure out ways of balancing both, but that's part of our culture here at Beck's. We're encouraged to be involved with our families. And so it's not like I'm having to explain to everybody why I can't be this at this event, because I'm trying to be at my son or my daughter's track meet later on that afternoon. So So right, it goes down to hiring. It really does. And so we are an organization, and I truly believe in this as well too. Like we will take a very long time to hire somebody. We'll go through multiple, because we're not only dating them, they're dating us.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got that perfect, I have a colleague that's done a lot of hiring with a company. His name's Craig Spray, and he talks about a lot of times, okay, you find that culture fit and you find the job fit. That's that perfect marriage at that point in time. And so it
Right.
takes
Right.
a lot of discussion to make sure that happens. That being said, though, too, back to that intentionality, we also find that, hey, if we find we hire somebody and we get somebody on the bus and we find out it's not the right job fit, okay, but they still fit the culture, let's find a different spot on the bus that if it meets
Yeah.
their needs and our needs, great. But at the same time, too, if the culture fit's not there, I can move them around on the bus all I want. They're still going to be dissatisfied. And so we tend to work very quickly whenever we find out there's not a culture fit, because you don't bat 1,000. That's people. You just don't bat 1,000. And so we don't let that situation turn into what could be a really bigger situation later on at some point in time.
You bet. So since we're talking about culture, when you think about, I think I read from your bio, you got 7 direct reports, and that makes you responsible for another 47 on top of that, and then a whole dealer network
Right.
on top of that. I mean,
Right.
look at your numbers, like, man, this guy's got, it just keeps exponentially growing what he's in charge of. So obviously your leadership is impacting that. But when it comes down to, so we hire for culture, hire for cultural fit, try to get that person
Right.
right seat of the bus, right, to go and use a good to great analogy. Then how do you maintain that cultural, those cultural aspects that you're looking to have with, let's just start with the 7.
Yeah. So I think about with that 7, it starts with relationships, right? I mean, you've got to. I'm a big sports fan. I played sports most of my life. The only reason I'm not playing sports now is that nobody will have a 42-year-old broken down guy on their team anymore. But I still actively participate in sports. There you go. Yeah. And,
also 42 and also feel a little broken some days of the week.
Yeah, so I'm here in about 3 weeks. I'm getting to have having neck surgery, and I'm sure that's got nothing to do with my years of athletics and that stuff. But no, it goes back to, so I use that discussion around sports is, I heard someone talk about this definition of a coach the other day. Is a coach goes to where those people are at to take them to where they need to be. And that's probably where I start out with my team. I look at the 7 direct reports that I have, and I think about the region that I cover. So I cover the geographies of Illinois, Missouri, and Kansas for Beck's. And I look at my role a little bit kind of like the athletic director at a college. Probably not a lot of people know my name unless things are going bad, right? But that athletic director, if it's a very effective AD, you ensure that you get the best head coaches that not only know the game, but more importantly, they know how to recruit great talent. Because when they get great talent on their team and they love their players, that talent not only wants to play great, they want to stick around. They feel, again, I think about some of the most successful college football programs, and everybody likes to use Nick Saban, but it's the truth. You look at what Saban created in the times prior to NIL, and that, I mean, not only did he create great athletes in that program, produce great men and great athletes out of that program, they created fans of that program for years. So you've got, alumnus of Nick Saban's program that are not only giving their money and their time back to that organization, their families are bought into making sure the University of Alabama is successful. And so I kind of look at that model very similar. Kind of what I do here is that I'm not necessarily the Nick Saban. I'm trying to make sure I get the Nick Sabans of the world onto my team as leaders. They're going to recruit great players, great athletes that then are also potentially could develop into great coaches themselves at some point in time. And I think also too, I think about the development side of it. It's the best day ever whenever I'm sitting down and interviewing somebody, is that, man, I think that person could be my boss someday. And when I find those people, we try to get them hired. Number one, they're tough to hire sometimes, but you get them hired and then you pour into them, and you pour into them from a developmental standpoint. You pour into them personally. I'm blessed to work in an organization where I think I could call up any of those 46 additional people and say, hey, I'm in trouble for XYZ reasons. Could you help me out? Absolutely, Clint. And they feel the same way with me as well, too. The dealer network, Beck's organization, we do a great job of, I had somebody describe this to me one time. We were at one of our events. It was actually our Becknology Day event this past year out in Atlanta, Indiana. We had a group of customers. We'd all gone to dinner with some dealers, employees after the field show event. Mm-hmm. We're sitting at the table, and the guy just started turning around. He goes, "Well, what do you do for Beck's? What do you do for Beck's? What do you do for Beck's?" And we were just kind of talking. Of course, you had dealers sitting at the table. You had employees sitting at the table. You had myself. And he said, "That's why I love doing business with this company, is that it's like you guys, doesn't matter what level you're on at the organization, you're all just kind of treat each other. You just treat each other the same. You're all the same. You all act like you can see things through my shoes." And so when you're around an organization like that, it's easy to want to see your teammates want to do better, because guess what? They look at your wins as their wins. And so fostering that type of environment, and I know I'm kind of rambling on some of my answer here a little bit, but it's a lot of different pieces of that equation where you create a family, and so I think about the way I do things, which is not necessarily the right thing. I mean, just because I've been around it for so long, I try to design this whole thing around some of the most successful sports teams, the Bobby Bowdens of the world, Nick Sabans of the world. I've read a lot of their books, just to try to get how did they create the cultures that they created. And I can't necessarily say I've ever got the Nick Saban culture down or Bobby Bowden culture down, but boy, you pick up tidbits from those folks here and there. You can do some pretty amazing things when you get really amazing people on your team.
Yeah. Well, so I do want to just distill one thing out of what you just said there, which all of it's great. I mean, I love the athletic analogy. A lot of us get that. If you're on as a regional, what do you call your title officially?
Regional business manager. Yeah. I don't even know some days. So yeah, right. I don't even know some days.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter as long as you know what you're doing, right? Whatever we call each other, right? But as a regional business manager, right, you start to see yourself as that athletic director, that's a unique analogy I had not heard. I think that's pretty cool. And then you go and start thinking about, cool, so I'm recruiting head coaches to run these different territories within my region, and they got to be great recruiters of dealers and so on and so forth. So so that in and of itself is very cool. It's a great analogy. I would love for people to think about themselves in that way, because now you're thinking about, hey, if my job is similar to Clint's job, that's how I need to be thinking about myself. And if that analogy works for me, that works for you. But you take it, you even take it a step deeper, which is like, this is how I distinctly do it. And that's one of our core tenets, if you will, of what the definition of intentional leadership is. I talked a little bit about this off the call, and I haven't officially yet, and maybe by the time this podcast comes out, maybe we will have unveiled the official framework, but distinction in the process of it's one of those things, one of those categories that we look at. There's 3Ds that we look at. Then the middle one is that intentional leadership has to be distinct. You have to have your unique way of going about it, right?
Yeah.
And that's unique to everybody. That's in a specific role. Now, when you go about being distinct in your role and then leading your team in your unique way, using your unique analogies, that's required you to have made a decision at some point about what that is.
Right.
When you do that, you also subconsciously give others around you permission to do that themselves. Right. And they'll start to see, hey, he's doing this intentionally, right? I'm going to have my own maybe distinct and then, but still intentional way of going about things.
Yep.
It sets the tone of excellence within the team.
Well, yeah, I think, and my first exposure that I can think back to, and I probably had lots of different ways. I mean, again, I was blessed. I was raised by, two parents that loved us. I was raised on a farm in the 80s, so that wasn't much fun at times. Luckily, our family made it through that from a farming standpoint. But we were raised with a family of faith, and I had a mom and dad that were, maybe at times people would call them strict, but man, they had their ways of why we were raised that way. And so I came out of high school and college thinking, hey, there was probably a system to everything. And I got into college, and so I talked about my time in sports. I did college athletics, and specifically track and field, shot put, and discus. And I think some of that even carried to, I was always so obsessed with my technique and shot put and discus being a certain way. I wanted it to be the same way as some of the greats. And what I learned in that and I had success, but my success went up exponentially when I realized that, okay, I can take key components from these different great throwers, but I still have to make it my own. And I had a coach that talked about making it my own, because guess what? No matter what, even if I had the similar body type to another, say, successful athlete, it's not the same. We're all different. And when I begin to see that, my performance there just took off exponentially. I've tried to use that same framework when I work on my own growth as well as others' growth. It's especially in the world of social media and those types of, and everybody wants to blame everything on social media. Before social media, there were books, okay, and there still are books today.
Still are,
but sometimes we still are. There's people that want to get sometimes so hooked up on, well, hey, I have to do it this way, and for some, you definitely need to do it a certain way to maybe get your trajectory started. But at some point in time, you're going to have to make it your distinct own. And I can't tell you what that is, because I'm not you. I can give you a way to how I did it, but eventually you're going to have to figure out a way that you're going to do it that's going to work for you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Good stuff, man. I love it. Great concepts. Great. I love this thing that you just said. There's a system to everything, right? So can I figure out the system? And if I can just figure out the system to everything, then I can, create greater levels of success.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Good stuff, man. All right, let's talk a little bit about what were some of those big challenges that are, what's a big challenge you've had to overcome over the course of your 20 years out here?
Man, and I don't know. I get that question sometimes, and I tend to, everybody wants to fall maybe into like a specific thing, and as far as like business or maybe this particular situation that you were in, and again, I've been blessed. I know I've had challenges business-wise, but it seems like, again, business-wise, those are the ones that are easier to figure out. Even with people challenges, like, man, usually you talk through things enough with people, you can get to the root of it. The biggest challenge for me, I'll tell you, is as a leader, are the ones that you don't have any control over. And I guess ultimately none of us have control over anything, but dealing with challenges where you've got an employee that, hey, they come to you and they tell you, hey, I'm getting ready to take cancer treatment. I'm getting ready to go through a divorce. I'm getting ready to, and probably more on the sickness side, because again, I don't have any control over that. Yeah, I could help you out maybe in your health and your training, but you come to me with a cancer diagnosis, there's only so much I can do. I think one of the toughest ones for me ever was whenever I got a phone call one time about a really close colleague that was getting ready to go through a divorce, and I was the second person that they called besides their son. And just to think, and that individual at that time, they still are this way, but they were, I think, 32 years older than I was, and so here I am counseling somebody that's at that stage, and at that point in time, I'd probably only been married for 10 years. What the heck did I know about life, right? So those are the tougher ones that, again, I think we, again, as young leaders, we all think that our toughest challenge. If you would ask a high school student what a regional business manager does on a daily basis, they would probably tell you, oh, he analyzes spreadsheets, he creates strategy, he does all this. Well, you know what? Really, what I spend, and I people are going to laugh when I say this, but I mean, seriously, when you think about people leadership, a lot of times what you're spending a lot of your time doing is managing junior high conflicts. Okay, and I don't mean that as to cast it down on junior high, but I mean just the same stuff that mattered. The same stuff that mattered to people in junior high still matter to people today. It's just bigger buckets that they're worried about on something.
We are right in there with you on this one. I mean, it comes up. So the nature of it. So we teach at our Thriving Leader event, we teach a framework called the story framework. And this is the thing we're most likely to be asked to come back and just teach to that entire organization, just this one framework. Because what it does is it gives people a framework with which to communicate through some of those crucial conversations, some of those tough, like those little junior high conflicts that we have. And anybody who says you're not having these inside your organization is lying. Like people are talking behind each other's backs. There's all these little jibs and jabs and
there's
skiffs.
Clicks. There's little clicks. I got to click over here, click over there. Yeah.
So we give them a tool to help work through this individually first, and then work through it together if need be. And that's the number one thing that we get called to come back to, but it's also the number one thing that we have to review with our clients again and again and again, because these things don't go away until you
They
evolve
don't.
beyond it. So, yeah.
And even the most healthy organizations, I'd be sit there. I believe Beck's a very healthy organization, but you
Mm-hmm.
have to be intentional about tearing down. When you see a silos being built, you got to be
Yep.
intentional about tearing that down. And people are like, well, how do you do that? Well, like you said, there's systems you put in place, but a big part of it is just work your darn tail off. I mean, as we as an organization grow, we work really hard on keeping the culture that made us what we were back in 1937 when the company started to today. And it's that connectivity. It's, we work really hard on having events that you have not only the employee at, but the spouse at, the dealer spouses at. And that's huge. I know the months of January till planting time, everybody's like, man, your schedule's full. I said, yes, but I'm doing it for things that matter. I'm there with the employees at the customer trip and customers and dealers. I'm at a dealer trip. We're at another event where dealers and customers are there. All those things are about building relationships. And if you build relationships intentionally, back to that junior high conflict analogy I used there, it's amazing what you can get through when you've got really deep relationship wells built up with people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 100%. Abs. That's really, really well said. Really, really well said. One of the things we teach when we get into sales training is we spend a lot of time working with people, not on how to sell more units of seed, not on just how to push more tons of fertilizer or whatever, but how to build the network before you need it.
Bingo.
Like, what's that?
That's huge.
You and I talked about leading
Yeah.
versus lagging indicators at the beginning a little bit, right? Your current sales numbers are a measurement of what you've been doing, but they're not a measurement of what's going to happen. The leading indicator that you ought to be focusing on are what are those relationship building activities that you do on a daily and weekly basis? Are you hitting those? Are you doing those? Those are the leading indicators that are going to be that should give you some level of confidence as to whether or not those sales results are going to be there again next time.
And I can tell actually what your comments are like. And again, this is hard. I mean, and everybody's got to do it differently, right? My systems, like sometimes I'll actually put a tick mark down where I know we're having a conversation with somebody about X, Y, Z things, and if I know that if they are engaged in what the things I need them to do, which again I talked about recruiting. Recruitment's a huge part for our business. I've always said in the seed business, he or she who holds the relationships holds the keys to everything. And so when we're talking about recruitment, and I hear somebody as we're just having a catch up conversation about how life's going, and they without me having to bring it out of them, but they bring up recruitment, I know, okay, it's back to again, it's top of mind. And if it's top of mind, they're being intentional about it.
Yeah. Good stuff, man. Well, what books, podcasts? I'm sure you spent a lot of time in your truck, man. What do you listen to stay up on things and stay educated?
Oh, well, that's a variety of things. So I'd say books. So, book wise, I do try to read at least every day, about 30 minutes, first thing when I wake up. And I don't always get that accomplished, but I try to do that. So I'm a John Maxwell junkie. So I'm a John Maxwell certified team member. So podcast wise, I listen to John Maxwell podcast quite a bit. And right, whether it's a John Maxwell thing or a Craig Rochelle thing, any of that stuff I think is awesome. I've been listening to your podcast here recently, so Mark, congratulations, you're on my list there. But
Love it.
But I tell you, so I listen to a lot of John Maxwell stuff. And John Maxwell's got a voice for whatever reason. Like I could listen to that guy read the phone book, so I think that's part of what pulls me into John Maxwell.
Yeah.
But he's also got some really good concepts. So one of the books I really enjoy I've enjoyed is that 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. I go back to that book quite a bit and reference that. Another book, we had this individual speak at our one of our conferences one time at Beck's, was John O'Leary, and the book On Fire. If you've ever had a chance to read that book and hear his story, is just, and part of the reason I think his story in that book resonates with me so much is that, he talks a lot about Jack Buck and the St. Louis Cardinals. And I mean, a lot of my childhood in Northeast Missouri was in a pickup truck or on a tractor listening to St. Louis Cardinals and Jack Buck. And so like a lot of stories he tells, I can almost put myself into that story, and his leadership principles that John O'Leary has, I think, are really good as well a lot of the ones I listen to. So that me morning time is very much about personal and professional development. If I do get some spare time, not on my phone or talking on my phone. And then the afternoon, I go from an entertainment standpoint. So there's one here, if you ask me about, I can't ever think of it, but it's actually stories about the Old West. I'll give you this one. This will be one that maybe your crowd hasn't heard of before, or maybe they have, but it is called, it's on my Spotify, it pulls up, Legends of the West is what it is.
Okay.
So, it's a good book or not a good book, but a good podcast about some of the different stories that, again, would have been learned in grade school, but just a little different perspective on some of them.
Yeah, I like that. So Legends of the West, that's your afternoon reading. It's good. I mean, it's not really fiction, right? Still, but it's history, but it's good to just kind of give your brain a little something else to divulge, because we are reading spreadsheets, we are looking at reports, we are doing heavy lifting energetically within the relationships that we have to manage each day at work. So having a little something, I mean, I have a couple of fiction books that are just like, not really learning anything, but it gives my brain somewhere to kind of get a little bit of a release, so that's good.
And I've also done that with, I kind of got on a kick there for a while. I didn't get back on it, but I was reading books about past U.S. presidents, and back when I was weaving in leadership, but it was also more biographies, like just again, it's interesting to learn, to take some leadership lessons from the leaders of the past. And again, when you read some of those books, you're like, man, they're really just like you and I. I mean, and every leader really is. They just happen to. Back again, some of the different factors in a lot of cases were being at the right place at the right time with the right relationships. And that's, I still feel like that's a huge part of what success is about, is right time, right place, right relationships. And if you give yourself a variety of those, you'll eventually come across the combination that's going to unlock success for yourself.
One that I listened to recently, a podcast, is I'm sure RFK is not massively popular in the agriculture industry, but if you can tolerate his voice for long enough, he did an interview with Jocko Willink on Jocko's podcast.
Yep.
And Jocko has been on the podcast, has been like the number one recommended Extreme Ownership. That's been the number one recommended book across the board. And I pay attention to Jocko. I love some of his content. I don't listen all the time, but I noticed that RFK was on there and they had an interesting title. So I started listening in. What's really cool, because Jocko does such a great job of diving in and asking good questions about people's past and history. And like, he likes to evaluate strategy and decision-making and what were you thinking, or what were people thinking? So, we have our version of history that we learned about what happened to JFK, what happened at the Bay of Pigs, what happened, the Cuban Missile Crisis, what happened with when Robert Kennedy Sr. was assassinated, what was going on with all that, what were these guys doing behind the scenes? In the interview, he gives it from his perspective, because he had a front row seat. He has the letters that we mentioned, like a letter that John F. Kennedy sent him, about like a handwritten letter about what just had, something that they were dealing with in the White House that day. Cause that's the level of intention that those leaders had back then. Right. So he had the front row seat to the history that we only basically experience as conspiracy theory. Right. And so he talks about this in depth and with detail on that podcast. And that was super cool to me, because I don't care if you want to vote for him for president or not, doesn't matter to me, but the idea of like being able to see history from that perspective, from the perspective of somebody who actually has had access to this, who doesn't seem to have an agenda, other obviously wants to get elected, but he seems to be fairly truthful, and compared to other presidential candidates that we might have, actually seems pretty coherent.
So, good point.
But that was a really cool interview.
Yeah, and we're all in what you talked about right there. I mean, just having some of that access. That's what I do love about what you're doing here. Again, I think too, this goes back to, take an RFK or whoever you want to talk about. I mean, we all put leaders on this pedestal up here that almost is. We tell ourselves stories and we make them almost mythical creatures. And I think when you get the podcast, or you have access to sit downs with people, You find out, like you said, people writing letters to people like, well, I didn't know anybody wrote a letter anymore. It's like, well, that's, just those level of people seeing that people are just people again at the core. And you're right. We as society tend to want to judge based upon the snippets that we see in social media or this or that. And it just amazes me that people would sit back, and that's something that Jocko does a really good job of. If people would sit back and ask enough questions, you'll find out at the root of most people, there's a lot of good and a lot of good sound reasoning for why they did what they did. But we don't let ourselves get that deep a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, this is a shorter form show, but that's one of the things I do appreciate about those long form shows is it's really giving people like that, like RFK, or pick any leader, pick any athlete, any, person who's coming on. Like, it allows us as the average person to really sit down and get to know this person. And obviously we have to assume the best intent and that people aren't lying and, that they're telling the truth and things like this. But golly, like we this is, for decades, we've been dependent on whatever the news would give us. And that was what allowed that form of content to become very manipulative.
Well, right. And I think that's what the times I've watched, like some of the Joe Rogan stuff. I mean, like only issue I have with Joe Rogan is like he puts out too many podcasts, so now it's almost too much, but I can't keep up. But yeah, I mean, like when he first started doing what he was doing, I mean, you got a chance to actually, again, you got a chance to see, like, the biggest issue is we tend to dehumanize everything and everybody. And he actually back to almost humanized people that are certain figures that, and even himself, I think people had their certain own perspectives of who Joe Rogan was. And then he did these podcasts, and we found out, he's just a dude that likes to work out and hit things. Cool. And drink some bourbon once in a while.
Bow, he goes hunting, right? I mean, he may have some different political beliefs or beliefs about food than I do and things like that. But, I think, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I was like, what I would love of our generation to be known for from a leadership perspective, say 30 years from now, we're kicking back and we're, saying, hey, what'd you do? What'd you get done? Would be that we were able to bring humanity back into our conversations. And
that's awesome.
And just like, we don't have to agree on everything, Clint, right? But we can still be friends, right? Like, we don't.
I remember a leadership program. So I had a chance to go through the Missouri ALOP program, Ag Leadership Tomorrow, and through that program, we had a chance to visit different areas of the state, and then got a chance to go to DC to international trip. But one of the most valuable ones of those meetings I had is we actually, of all places, we got a meeting and sit down with the Humane Society of the United States in Washington, DC. So you got a group of ag leaders in the office of the HSUS. So, we didn't break out the gloves and start punching one another, but it was interesting sitting in there in that room. Now, again, I do not agree at all with what their viewpoints were. But again, you got a chance to humanize, like, wait a minute, they were, I think going into that, I went into that thinking that, man, these people, as soon as they see us, are probably going to try to, put us on a stake and burn us on a cross type of thing. But they were making the decisions they were making simply because they believed that's what the right thing was to do. They weren't trying to necessarily put me out of business. They were just doing because they thought that was the right thing to do. And it's like, once I came to that realization, like, we could actually have a meaningful conversation. Now, again, don't agree with anything they're doing, and don't agree with the mindset of trying to destroy production agriculture. But again, it just if I had not had that avenue, that opportunity, that made me grow as a leader that day, putting myself in that uncomfortable situation.
And more of us need to be putting ourselves into those conversations, some very difficult conversations, sitting down belly to belly with people that you disagree with.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And we don't, and again, I think everybody thinks we got to come out of that room thinking we're all going to agree and shake hands. And I like to think we could at least shake hands, but if all I did was have a better perspective of how they see things, that's either going to do one of two things. It's either potentially going to change my mind, which more than likely it's not, or the second thing it's going to do is, like, what, I can at least respect this person more. And by God, if we could respect each other more, back to your humanization, your humanizing society more, well, I think we've done our job as leaders at that point in time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, man, by golly, like if you even just like take the time to sit down and get to know someone and not just what you perceive uh, you think they're about, right? You
Yes.
actually sit down and get to know somebody and get belly to belly and start to understand, you know, like that over time. And it's not immediate. We got to get away from this immediate gratification stuff. But over time, like I start to get to know
Right.
this person as a real human. And that's where, you know, I spend my life in the personal development space, helping people grow. That's what our company does. So
Yep.
what I recognize is that personal growth does not, or relationship building, or behavior change, which means effectively changing someone's belief system about themselves and what's possible, and then supporting them in the trajectory of their new
Mm-hmm.
growth. So it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it's not a hockey stick up and to the right on an XY axis. Okay.
Right.
It's
I
up
like
and
that.
down,
That's
it's
good.
jagged, it's backwards, it's, you know,
The
topsy.
roller coaster. Yeah.
It doesn't,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's a roller coaster. So you have to be willing to sit with someone while they undergo change. You sit with them, as you said,
Yeah.
while they go through their divorce. You sit with them
Yep.
while they go through the sickness, right? And you support them the best you can as a team leader, as an intentional leader. That's part of the job. You're a little bit of a part-time priest or shaman, kind of helping this person
Yep.
through
Yes.
their tough time, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's, oh yeah. Whenever folks, I talk about the management of people, and it's like, well, do you enjoy being, have you ever thought of yourself as as that psychiatrist, you know, that listener, that person there to hold the hand? And if you haven't, then you got to really be thinking about the managing of people, because are you doing this for you, or are you doing this to help others out? Because I think real leaders, they're doing it to help others out. Yeah. They might have success that comes along with it, but if they're driven by success first and the people second, that success is going to be not maintained long term.
Absolutely, man. All right, Clint, we got to bring it in for landing. We're hitting up on our time here today, but man, that's been a wide ranging, fun conversation. Very vibrant. Hope you guys have enjoyed listening to this. You can get a hold of Clint over on the LinkedIn. Check
Hey,
on
there
see
you go.
what's going
Yeah.
on over there, and check out Beck's Hybrids. But man, thanks for doing this. It's been fun conversation today.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Enjoyed talking and sharing thoughts about leadership. So thank you very much. Appreciate all that you're doing as well too, because I think that is a space that leadership development, and you look at where the space is in the country, we are at a leadership deficit, and that's all across.
So
So
true.
appreciate your intentionality around working on that, and thank you so much. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So you should be employed for a long
We're just gonna keep putting value in. Thanks for being here.
time. Thank you.